Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of this program, of course, Eric Eggers. Eric, it's about a week since those elections. We know a lot of things, some things we still don't know, but we're going to unpack that today, right? We're going to try to unpack and make sense of what happened, why it happened, the role of money in politics, whether it still matters, and why we still don't know the results a week later of some congressional races in California. It's quite stunning when you look at these numbers.
Yeah, we're a couple of white conservative males, so we don't need any help feeling empowered. And then you get Donald Trump elected president, and you kind of just take that and jack it up on steroids. So it's almost like it seems like many different things are possible now.
Yeah.
But I do think that where we are in terms of elections, it's kind of like, when I was a kid, they had these books, the Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Like, if you want to go in the cave, go to page 87. If you want to go to the river, and then you go to the cave,
you
find out.
You always chose the cave, I bet.
Well, yeah, I went back in both because inevitably you're going to die in one place and keep going.
Right.
I don't know what you're pretending to say about me with this cave situation. The point of this is I feel like when it comes to American elections, it's kind of a choose your own adventure moment. Like, do you want elections to look like how they looked at the federal level for president, or do you want them to look like how they looked in 2020 and how some of these weird House races are now?
Yeah.
Because I think the common ingredient for many of these races are the way in which many of these ballots are cast. Like, how can we be at a place where it's a week plus out and we're still waiting on mail-in and harvested ballots to show up?
Yeah, so let me give you some numbers, some shocking numbers. In Florida, where we live, in the entire state, the third most populous state in the entire country, we have counted 99.9% of the ballots by the weekend. That is 5 days after the election. They counted 99.9% of the ballots. Here are the numbers from California congressional districts a week after the election.
To misquote Allen Iverson, not a state now. We're talking about a district.
We're talking about a district. In the California's 13th congressional district, as of a week after the election, they've counted 62% of the ballots. In California's 21st, 66%. In California's 22nd district, 77%. In California 47th district, they've counted 82%. By the way, that's in Irvine, California. It's not like this is off in the hinterlands somewhere. And I could go on and on and on with the other congressional district number 9 in California. 74% of the ballots. That's the only amount that has been counted a week after the election's been held. I mean, look, this is not Senegal. This is not Bangladesh.
No, but it's California.
It's California. It might as well be. I mean, it's insane to me that they are taking this long to count the ballots. And this is a concern that you would have based on your research on fraud, that this is an area where there could potentially be fraud, because why is it taking so long?
100%. And by the way, apologies to the people listening in Bangladesh and Senegal. We didn't mean to disparage you and your elections.
By comparing you to California, we apologize.
So here's the real question. Do we think the delays are happening in California because of the manner in which they're casting the ballots and counting them, a lack of election safeguards? Ballot harvesting is legal in California, so you got all these ballots kind of floating around. Or do you think that because we have known now for over a week that Donald Trump is president, the people who are California residents who are counting the ballots, they just can't soldier on? It's like I get through 50 of them, I have to take a break, I cry, I grab my comfort animal, and then you kind of get back to the business of being defeated. So, but to the point, and, that's what we saw happen in 2020. We did not know who the president was for many days. And then it's like, no, now it's done.
Yeah. And this delay, the fact that it's not a transparent process, you haven't pleased you, that's what leads to suspicions. And by the way, in these congressional races, it's going to determine if the Republicans have the majority, how big is it going to be? These are all races that seem to be razor thin. And for the life of me, I don't understand logistically how you cannot have counted more than 62% of the ballots a week after the election when you were in the state of California, which is sort of the tech capital of the planet.
Yeah.
It's insane. These are the kind of suspicions that get raised and some of the concerns we have.
Survey says unions, as it turns out. It's like, how come we haven't gotten more done, guys? It's like, it's the mandated bathroom break. I got it.
Well, let's talk about money and politics, because you pointed out something very, very interesting.
Well, so I think this is a key thing. So one of the reasons why states like California, all these ballot races seem to be extended in California, is because California has among the more liberal ballot integrity laws in the state.
Yeah.
Ballot harvesting is legal. Remember, Gavin Newsom signed into law something that prohibits any community in California from requiring voter ID,
right.
Which, by the way, we've seen that chart, which is like the Trump wins the states where voter ID is required and then he doesn't where there's not. But, you know, a lot of the people that have been the person that's spearheaded a lot of these election integrity issues for the left, we did a podcast about him a couple weeks ago, Mark Elias.
Yeah.
Now, Mark Elias is not defeated. His candidate, Kamala Harris, has been defeated, but he has found more work. In case you're worried that the Elias children were going to go hungry, Mark Elias is now back on the take and back on the job in Pennsylvania. And here's what's really interesting about this.
Yeah.
You know, if democracy was on the ballot because, in part, Donald Trump tried to elevate concerns about the election results from 2020, the Associated Press has called the Pennsylvania Senate race. They've said GOP candidate Dave McCormick is the winner.
Right.
And he's got a margin of 40,000 votes. And like of the ballots that are out there, there's 87,000 provisional ballots, but these are ones that they've been challenged. They've got some defects. There's questions about the validity of it.
Right.
And like only 30,000 of those ballots are coming from places that Casey strongholds are. And so that's one of the reasons why the Associated Press
is saying, look,
has
it's
called
over.
it.
Yeah.
But what Mark Elias is trying to do is he's kind of judge shopping, and he's trying to figure out a way to get it so they can get enough of it in to trigger a mandatory recount. This is exactly what he did in the Minnesota Senate race that he's got Al Franken, once he got a judge to allow over 1,000 ballots that had previously been discarded because they had some associated with felons.
Right.
And that's why a lot of people think that Al Franken shouldn't have been put in the Senate in the first place because of Mark Elias and illegal votes. All that said, so he's now on the job in Pennsylvania. And here's what's really interesting about the fact that he's working in Pennsylvania. What's one of the reasons, in your opinion, that Donald Trump did as well in Pennsylvania as he did?
Well, I think he had a great message. It resonated with people. And he also had a lot of support. They spent a lot of money there, as Kamala Harris did. Mm-hmm. But I think it was the messaging and the focus on the issues that really mattered. You know, the fears that Kamala Harris was trying to raise with people about Donald Trump ended up for most voters to be an abstract, a fiction, that he's going to destroy democracy, that, women are going to be carried away in chains because of abortion issues. People looked at it and said that is incredible. What is credible is the cost of groceries have gone up. I have other concerns related to my economic future. So I think that was a key element of his success in Pennsylvania.
So I agree with you. And I think that was a key element to his success broadly throughout the entire country. And we have some amazing stats on that we'll get to in a second. But I would say singular to Pennsylvania was also the presence of a man named Elon Musk. You've heard of him.
I think so, yeah.
And the fact that he was able to take this thing called America PAC, and basically he was able to set up shop, take Twitter employees or take people that work, here's a guy that can catch a dang rocket with chopsticks. He can figure out how to get people to the ballot box in a really big way, and not in a like sad girl Jen O'Malley Dillon way. Oh, we tried. We knocked on some doors. But like Elon Musk is out there like doing stuff, right? Anyway, but the whole reason why they were allowed to do this, why they were allowed to essentially coordinate this America PAC with the Trump campaign, is actually because of Mark Elias. So that's what's delicious about this. No, check it. Yeah, and credit to Ken Vogel from the New York Times who pointed this out initially. So if you go to Mark Elias's website, he brags in March of earlier this year that Texas Majority PAC, a PAC they set up to try to get Ted Cruz defeated and Colin Allred elected, told the FEC that it would consult with federal candidates, committees, and their agents in paid canvassing operations. And said they'd like to do so, and it wouldn't count as coordinated communications or an excessive in-kind communication. They basically said, hey, we're allowed to coordinate. We're kind of a side thing, but we're going to coordinate with these campaigns.
So that was allowed in Texas.
Because
of Mark Elias.
Because of Mark Elias. And that's exactly the guidance that ruling from the FEC is what Elon Musk used in Pennsylvania to get out there and drive up the vote tallies. And oh, by the way, Elon Musk announced this week that thing that they used to help deliver Pennsylvania in a big way for Trump is not going anywhere. They're going to keep it around. They're going to keep using it for sort of make America great again candidates in House races in the midterm and other special elections as needed.
Oh, very, very interesting. So kind of you live by the pack and you die by the pack, right? This is Mark Elias thought this was going to be a big win. They were going to use it to unseat Ted Cruz. Didn't happen. By the way, they always seem to do this. Every time Ted Cruz is up, they say he's vulnerable, he's going to be defeated. Again, it didn't happen. But that same approach, Elias is a master at this. We talked about this. He knows the dark arcs of politics. It ends up that's the same technique that Elon Musk uses in Pennsylvania, and certainly that get out the vote effort made, I think, a huge difference in Pennsylvania.
And the criticism of Mark Elias is he's so aggressive and at times reckless that his losses create rulings or precedents that other people use to then beat him later, and that's kind of what happened here.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of funny. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. It literally made a difference, I think, in Pennsylvania. Now, more to the larger point about what we do know. We don't know what's going on with these House races, although I have seen some claims that Republicans should hang on to it.
Seems to be. Yeah.
But one thing we do know is that, to your point, the cries of fear and the fear-mongering about Donald Trump didn't seem to work nationally. Now, I tested you on this earlier. I asked you, I said, there are 3,100 counties in this country.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
3,100 of them. Of those that have nearly complete results, which of course doesn't count a couple in California,
Right.
What percent shifted in favor of Donald Trump from 2020? Like what percent of the 3,100 counties in this country shifted more to the right than 4 years ago?
I'll say like 300 counties, which is 10%.
10%. You would be wrong by a factor of a lot. It's 90%. 90% of the counties in this country voted more conservatively or more in favor of Donald Trump than did 4 years ago.
Wow.
Now, I mean, I think that tells you a couple of different things, but the answer to me lies in one of my favorite memes that I've seen kind of floating around. And, there's some videos out there about the media kind of losing it, but they're not as good as they were 8 years ago, right?
Right.
I mean, there's not the emotional breakdowns aren't there. And
by the way, you told me you were doing research on this. By research, you meant reading memes?
Listen, tomato. But I think there's something sociologically significant in this. But look, we'll find out. Here's the meme I've seen floating around. It says, while your daughter is bleeding out in a hospital room without health care, natural disasters are ruining your home, and you no longer have Social Security, I hope your eggs are cheaper.
That worked really well in the election, didn't it? But that typifies it to me because everything that they're talking about is literally an abstract.
Yeah.
It's an abstract. Natural disasters, Trump's responsible for more natural disasters, this whole thing about climate change. I mean, the data just doesn't support it. Yeah. We have as many hurricanes on average now as they did 100 years ago. And the claims about, we're going to take away, abortion rights, our daughter's going to be... Again, that's not an issue. Trump took it off the table. It's been controversial with some conservatives, but took it off the table. Those are all abstract things. The cost of eggs going up may seem minor, but it's the cost of everything that went up. And that's not abstract. That's real. People actually experienced it.
There was a moment on Morning Joe when Joe Scarborough was attempting to explain to everybody, everyday Americans, like how this could have happened, how people would have voted for cheaper eggs instead of, people losing their lives in hospital rooms without health care and no more Social Security. And he goes, yeah, somebody told me, he goes, yeah, butter's $3. Can you believe it? And then Mika's like, no, it's $7. They clearly shop at different stores. But the point is that there's a lack of awareness of like the tangible, fungible cost of everyday goods.
Right.
You hear the one takeaway from a lot of Democrats in the chattering classes, we've lost touch with middle-class America.
Right.
And I think that's the point, right? Yeah, like people want the fundamental ability to feed their families.
Yeah.
And the perceived threats about the loss of health care or Trump somehow responsible for more natural disasters, those don't resonate in a real way like the cost of food.
Yeah, exactly right. And so The question is, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, where do the Democrats go from here? I mean, you hear some people saying we need to move more towards the center, right? You see Bernie Sanders saying we've got to focus more on blue-collar voters, by which Bernie Sanders means more government programs, more democratic socialism kind of stuff. I'm skeptical that they're actually going to do this. I think the Gavin Newsom approach, which is we're going to actually double down, is the right one, because I'm not sure it's what we're talking about really is a thought process on the left. Progressivism has become a religion. I mean, it's become a object of devotion, a test of one's obedience to the cause. And I just don't think that they're going to be able to say, you know, the transgender stuff, we don't believe that anymore. The extreme climate change stuff, we just don't believe it anymore. They can't help themselves, and I don't think they can separate themselves from it.
I want to know what you mean by the Gavin Newsom approach, because I feel like a lot of people listening to this might not know. But to your point about Bernie Sanders, he may be in favor of more government programs. I mean, when was he not? But he also said that the Democratic Party, this is in the aftermath, he said the Democratic Party has increasingly become the party of identity politics.
Yeah,
rather than understanding the majority of people that live in this country are working class. This trend of workers leaving the Democratic Party started with whites, and it's accelerated to Latinos and blacks. Now, back to your, like, will they actually be able to do this?
Right.
In the same article where you get Bernie Sanders quote on the one hand, your favorite representative from your home state of Washington, Pramila Jayapal, who's, by the way, the chair of the Progressive Congressional Caucus,
right,
said that we need to create space for people's fears and let them get to know people, who described herself as, quote, the proud mom of a daughter who happens to be trans. And we need to counter the idea that my daughter is a threat to anyone else's children. Now, I do think, in looking at the stats, because it's weird about how much of this seems to be related to the LGBT, QT stuff.
Right. And
specifically the T.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't think anybody has a hard time with the LG and the B and the Q. But it's like that Dave Chappelle skit, it's like, no, the T's, they're the problem in the car. And I think they were for Democrats, because like that ad that Trump ran over 30,000 times during football games, and everyone's like, yeah, the Harris campaign never really countered it. They ran tests. They ran some, but it didn't test well. So they didn't have any response to it. But as far as like who Democrats think their voters are, 2 years ago, the Human Rights Campaign found that LGBTQ people account for 11% of the nation's voting eligible population, and they had a record-setting turnout in 2022. Equality voters, or voters that support LGBT equality, were 62 million in 2022, or what they call 38% of the electorate. So Democrats see that as actually their base. They may have lost working class people, but they've gone there.
But you wonder what that means. I mean, here's the thing that I found interesting in the election results. Among women under the age of 30, so voting age 18 to 30, 40% of them voted for Donald Trump. 40%, which is an astronomical number when you given that, when you're younger, you're a woman, you're being pushed the abortion issue. And I think the point is that, and probably a lot of them would say, oh yeah, I have no problem with LGBTQ stuff. But I think it was the concerns about women's sports. The fact that you got male volleyball players and male boxers that are like, violently striking women from the other team. I think that resonated, and there's a level to it. But here's the split. Here's the division that I see between Jayapal's position and Bernie Sanders' position. Most blue-collar people in the United States are generally socially conservative. They're not out there at rainbow parades. They're trying to put food on the table. They're going to church. They're trying to make sure their kids are doing their schoolwork. They're focused on those issues. And so the notion that we're going to do all of the above, we just need to do a little bit more of the Bernie Sanders stuff and we'll be fine, is not going to work, because they're not going to let go of the social liberalism. They just can't. That's where I think a lot of the money from the Democratic Party comes from. It comes from Hollywood. It comes from the big tech area. And it's going to be very, very hard for them to say, you know what, we're going to stop talking about those issues. I just don't think the core of that party is going to let those things go.
You may not have meant to do it, but you actually just gave them the answer to how to move forward and kind of and have the best of both worlds. And I think that's what you mean by the Gavin Newsom thing. Like, look, still take the left coast money, take the Silicon Valley money, take the woke, progressive kind of identity politics ideals, have your LGBTQ parades, just offer free food there because that's the only way the working class people can feed their families. You bring them into the big tent and then you move forward together.
Yeah.
So what is Gavin Newsom saying that makes you think that that's how they'll move forward?
Well, Gavin Newsom's position is to double down. He had this PAC that was associated with him, a nonprofit associated with him in California that was a California-focused nonprofit. He's raised a lot of money for it for various causes. A couple of days after the election, it has now been reconstituted into an anti-Trump nonprofit. And he's already gone to Washington, D.C. He's already rallying the base. And I think where the Democrats are going to have this internal debate that is going to be personified in Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, squaring off against Josh Shapiro, who's a more centrist Democrat, governor of Pennsylvania. They are probably the two likely faces we're going to see running for president in 2028. And I got to tell you, I do not like Josh Shapiro's chances. He has a better opportunity in the general election. But the problem is the base of the party is so far to the left. He's going to have to either embrace those views, which will make it harder for him in the general election, or he's going to see the ground of Gavin Newsom. Gavin's going to raise all the money and he's going to win.
Okay, counterpoint. One of the, actually, I think the best points I've seen in some of the analysis after all this is that the biggest thing that hurts progressives is the areas that they're in charge of. Like everyone gets that San Francisco sucks, right? Yeah. And like, look, if you guys if you guys actually want to win, then the places that you're in charge of, states like California, New York, can't be the ones that are the most expensive, have the highest cost of living, have the most migrants, have all the other kind of cultural suffocation, where people don't necessarily feel free to, have all the EV mandates and things. So they say, look, if you want the rest of America to come with you, make your places what people want America to look like. I mean, there's a reason why DeSantis won re-election by 20 points in a record for Republican, and the phrase "Make America Florida" started to take off because people, generally see Florida as like, look, low taxes, nice climate, it's like good for business. I mean, that's attractional, and there's not a lot of Democrat-run states that can say that right now.
I agree. I mean, but if you look at the history of the Democratic Party, starting in 2004, John Kerry, Massachusetts, Barack Obama, Chicago, Illinois.
But you say this with such like tenor, like it's like a threat.
Well, it's just
Chicago.
They're all really, really terrible places to live in varying degrees. I mean, there's nice parts of Massachusetts, but I'm saying it's expensive, it's costly, they're high tax states. And then looking forward, you had Hillary Clinton and they had Joe Biden from Delaware, basically Washington, D.C., and then they turned it over to Kamala Harris from California. So that's the center of gravity of the party. And I think it's just like if somebody came into the GOP and said, okay, Donald Trump can't run for re-election, I'm going to run as a Jeb Bush Republican. You're not going to get anywhere in the modern day Republican Party, because the center of gravity in the party has shifted. It's the same thing in the Democratic Party, and that's where the money is. I might be wrong, but I think that's where the challenge is for the Democrats, is how do you hide and mask who is the actual base of your party, which turns off a lot of swing voters.
Well, and to your point, you're not wrong at all about that's where the money is. And just to kind of to tie a bow on the point, why have Democrats lost working class Americans? Why did 90% of the counties in this country shift right? It's because the money that sort of guides the ideology of the party, that money lists in those states that you just described as basically the Senegal and Bangladesh of the country, but it's because the people that have that money, they're rich enough to where it doesn't matter to them, right? Like they're fine. If you live in a multi-million-dollar mansion in California, you got no problems. But it's the rest of the people living in dang San Jose on a crowded street and going to shop at these, all these places there. It's a different experience. Yeah. And no, I think to your point but as long as the money's there, then you're going to see more like Gavin Newsom just double down.
Yeah. So the question is, assuming that the Republicans have the House and have the Senate and the White House, where is the agenda going to face the most resistance on Capitol Hill, right? I mean, you've got, I'm sure you're going to have big pushback on immigration. You're going to have big pushback on DOJ and FBI reform. I mean, these are all factors where already the forces are starting to array.
Yeah, I think immigration, you'll see a massive, because even I think The Five on Fox News came out. It's like, look, we're not trying to see grandmas taken away from families, things like that. I think you'll see pushback on immigration. I think you'll see pushback on winding down the Ukraine war just because of how much money is at stake in that, right? So basically anywhere where there's lots of money, people aren't just going to give that up willingly. So I think that's Ukraine. I think that you heard Donald Trump this week say that they want to end the Department of Education. That's not a poor agency. So that's hundreds of millions of dollars of tax dollars that people rely on. That's not, they want to give it to the states. But, when Steve Forbes was running for president back in 1996, and I can't believe I'm like dating myself this way.
And a Steve Forbes reference.
Well, I
didn't see that coming.
Well, he ran on the flat tax, right?
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
And I thought it was a good idea. But I also knew, even as like a teenager, I was like, bro, there's so many accountants and there's so many people that make so much money on this. There's no way that's just going to go away. Yeah. And so I think that's the test is like, is the benefit worth, like, how much institutional pushback will you get on this? Yeah. And we'll see.
No, it's going to be huge. It's going to be interesting to watch. We are going to be investigating, follow the money as we always do, looking at the issue of immigration, looking at the war, at the approach that the United States takes towards war. Trump has, really emphasized he wants to downgrade American engagement overseas, particularly when it comes to kinetic wars. There's going to be resistance from people, not from soldiers, not from Marines. They want to be home with their families. They don't want to be deployed overseas, but a lot of resistance because there are institutions and there are individuals that make a lot of money, not just the defense contractors, but the consultancies, the companies that are engaged in nation building. They all make huge amounts of money. There's certainly going to be pushback there as well.
Like the Liz Cheneys of the world.
Like the Liz Cheneys of the world. Exactly right. I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know your time is valuable. You can find out more about the research we do at thedrilldown.com. You can pick up either one of our books at Amazon or other bookstore locations, and you can find this podcast wherever fine podcasts are located. Thank you again. Until next time.